So I have the privilege of introducing our guest speaker today. I'm really excited to introduce this person. She is going to be talking to us about her career path of working in a group home for people with autism to her current position as a data scientist at Arista Networks. I hope I said that right. And I'm very excited to be introducing her because she's also a player on my rugby team, Eno River Women's Rugby, and is a very skilled player. And I think also I'm excited to hear about her career path in a little more detail because I know a lot of us come from backgrounds in different industries, many times, myself included, coming from a social services industry. And I know CTD's focus on using technology to help marginalized people and different populations that we tend to work with. That's a focus for us. So I think that a lot of us come from those industries, and it's interesting to hear different people start in that place and then move into the tech sphere, and in some cases use that experience and knowledge to continue helping people. So without further ado, I give you Rachel Beldner.
Thanks, Lauren. Let me share my screen. Yeah, so like she said, I am currently a data scientist with Arista Networks, but definitely had a pretty wayward path into tech. So my early aspirations, I come from New Jersey, a little town called Glen Rock in Bergen County, which is really close to New York City and very dense and overstimulating. And I was very happy to leave that region, as much as I enjoyed to still visit my family there. But my interest in high school was absolutely science. I really liked chemistry. I really liked math. It was what I wanted to do. And I was especially interested in genetics. It just was, such an exciting field to me. I was always interested in like what makes people the way that they are, and was really hoping to study that more in depth with genetics. So for college, I ended up going to University of Wisconsin-Madison. Because it was one of the few colleges that had an undergraduate degree in genetics. I think there were only like 12 programs that were undergrad at the time, at least. So I headed over there and was very excited to study particularly developmental disorder links with genetics. Once I was there, I realized that that field wasn't exactly what I thought it would be. And unfortunately, after taking the GPA hit from organic chemistry, decided to switch to psychology. Just because I became more interested in neurology and the way that you more hands-on work with developmental disorders, and I was particularly interested with autism. I was always really fascinated with language development and the way that we learn language and the way language is structured. So there was just like a lot of places where psychology and autism really fit with my interest. So what I mostly got out of that for like where I am today was statistics and hypothesis testing. I'm sure some of you have backgrounds with the social sciences, that it gets like some flack for not being like a hard science, but there is a lot of math that goes into the methodologies and figuring out what is significant or not. So that absolutely helped form my mindset for where I am today in approaching different problems. And then like as a minor, or UW called it a certificate, I also got an educational policies because again, I wanted to do more of a hands-on thing after considering spending my time just in a lab. So after college, I moved to Dubuque, Iowa because my partner at the time got a job in Dubuque, Iowa with IBM. So it was a really good opportunity. So we moved there. And for that year, I worked in a group home supporting 4 men with autism. The 4 of those men were nonverbal. They all had significant intellectual impairments as well. And they all had very aggressive behaviors. As Lauren said, I am a rugby player. I could hold my own physically, but that was definitely a challenging job. It was a challenging environment. I broke my elbow within that job. It was not, excuse me. Sorry, I should have muted my phone. So it was not uncommon for me to work 80-hour weeks because that home had a lot of turnover and not a lot of staff, and the men there required one-on-one care for all like awake hours and 1 to 2 care during overnight. So I think my longest shift there was actually like 64 hours straight because I had a sleep shift. So like I was there and did not come home for 64 hours. And I did get burned out from working in a field. That field was I had aspirations to maybe go back to school and become a speech language pathologist, again with my love of language. But I knew I needed some kind of change with that. And during that time, I was also co-authoring some encyclopedia articles with a professor that I knew on various like social topics like vaccinations, learning disorders, that kind of thing. Also, if anyone has any questions, feel free to jump in, I should say that. So my method for still working within that field and with what the populations that I was passionate about, but maybe getting away from working with people so directly and, you know, solving my burnout problem, was I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, and got a job with Relias. I moved to Raleigh just because my college best friend was going to grad school at NC State, and she kind of sold me on the area. But Relias is a company that they've expanded hugely since I first joined in 2014, but the bare bones is that they offer a learning management system and e-learning modules for people who work across healthcare and human services. So I had taken their courses when I was working as a direct support person, a professional. So I was already familiar with their work, and I just loved that I could still help people who were helping the people I cared about while getting kind of behind a computer and more in like an office environment. And during that time, I was also working part-time with a child with autism, just because I was passionate about that work. So my first job with Relias was as a support consultant. So if any of the customers had an issue, whether it was that they couldn't figure out how to set up their curriculum correctly and, you know, would require like an hour-long walkthrough, or they had just simply forgotten their login, I would be the one to answer that phone, email, or the chat to resolve whatever issue they were having. The benefit of that is because Relias had a strategy that was acquisition based. So at the time where I joined, they had already acquired, I think it was 4 or 5 companies. So they had 4 or 5 different learning management systems to maintain and support. And by the time I left, they had probably made, probably like 20 different acquisitions. So there was always something new to learn, which I really loved. I learned how to do like technical documentation for the various processes, especially when we had a new acquisition and I was like kind of the lead technical support person to work with that acquisition. And the other benefit was that I got familiar with Salesforce because that was the system we used to maintain all of the tickets, which is something I now use today to analyze people who are working on those tickets. So once I was kind of ready to be promoted from that position within the company, I was interested in the content department. They were the folks who were creating those courses and working with the writers and, you know, all of the people that I was, you know, the topics that I was most interested in within the company. I first applied to be a writer because I had some of those encyclopedia publications and had enough expertise in the fields to potentially contribute to the writing teams. But they had a project coordinator position open. So for a few years, I worked as a project coordinator and then promoted to project manager, which is a similar role, just more responsibilities. And essentially worked as the Scrum Master, project manager, you know, a lot of the like technical upkeep or data management was all kind of within that role. The process would be that a course would be planned. This could either be a new course or an update for a course because accreditations would require updates every few years for a course to still have the most current information and still be good. So there would be planning, then the writing, and then the building team. Those were the people who would actually make the, the document that the writers would write and make it an e-learning module with interactions, eventually even like simulations and all sorts of cool stuff. Then there would be the stakeholder review. So the subject matter experts would kind of sign off on like, yes, this is good course. And then finally the accreditations phase. And then it would go back to like actually putting it on the site and have all of the information correctly entered onto the database, which was also within my job. The database we used was QuickBase, which is kind of low code. Like it's very usable. We had people working on the back end, but it was a pretty simple back end, and it at least got me familiar with the idea of like relational databases. And I got very good with QuickBase, so much so that I was eventually incorporated into the training program so that when managers were hired, I would teach them how to use QuickBase. And to make my job easier, because I was working within the vertical that had the highest course volume, and 400 courses per year, it was a lot to track. I started doing some forecasting and trend analysis using Excel. So my first stab at it was like a spreadsheet with like 20 different tabs that I would copy and paste a QuickBase output, and it would tell me which courses we're going to take. Oh yeah, sorry, is there a question?
My name is Adriana, and I wonder if you can go deeper whatever you're explaining right now, like the trend analysis with Excel.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. So because there were like 400 courses per year, and that was just my vertical, so our team overall would have at least 1,000 projects within the calendar year, and all of our bonuses and metrics were tied to completing those goals. So I figured out a way from again, it was all hypothesis testing based. So before I joined that team, what we would do is we would know that if a course update was happening, we would just schedule 20 hours for it, because that was overall the average of course update projects that we could find out from QuickBase from just doing a quick mean. The problem is we weren't accounting for any kind of variation. So a course that would be 400 words would be budgeted the same allocation as a course that was 20,000 words, which common sense, like, oh, those will not take the same amount of time. So I did a series of hypothesis testing to find which variables, like things that you would expect, like word count, would be a variable that would, up or down the budgeted time. So I systematically kind of figured out which variables, some expected, some unexpected, that were the that would kind of give me a more accurate idea of what a course should actually be budgeted as. And then we could actually prioritize those longer courses ahead of time so that, we would have more time to work on it rather than being up against the wall for the deadline, which is something that the team used to be in a lot. And again, I did not know any code at that point, so everything was Excel. My big like 20 tab spreadsheet would take like 15 minutes to run, but we would get answers eventually. Does that kind of explain, or does anyone want me to go further in?
Yeah, I wonder if after you learned how to code, did you use another thing like analytics or something like that instead of Excel, or you keep using Excel?
So my work with this impressed my manager, who she also is still like one of the best mentors I've had in my career. And she saw what I was doing. She saw that I was really into it and that there could be a value to the company, that I was actually saving time and increasing efficiency to the point that they should carve out a different position, so that rather than doing all the Scrum Master and updating the databases, I could devote my time more to just those topics. So I got promoted to be a data analyst within the team, which was a position that had not existed yet. And I'm very grateful to that manager for giving me a shot at that. So that's where I then was only focusing on those kind of hypothesis testing, getting better at doing the predictive analytics on the different courses, especially because we were still acquiring companies at that point. So when we, have a type of course that we had never worked on before, I would go in and try to glean data from whatever systems they were using to get, fairly accurate ideas of what we would need to migrate everything over. Excuse me. And I also had the opportunity to get a Udacity nano degree. Relias, during the time that I was there, got acquired by Bertelsmann, which is a German company that also owns like Random Penguin House, like they're gigantic. And one of the companies that was owned by Bertelsmann was Udacity. And that's like an online learn to code, their first like big course, I think, was learn how to program one of the automated cars. I think the guy who started Udacity was one of the people at Stanford who worked on that first program. And he created a course that would help you learn how to also code like that. So it's very hands-on. And because we were sister companies, they, offered free nano degrees to a certain number of people. And I was lucky enough to get that. And that's where I learned Python, which totally, like I switched from Excel to Python very quickly, totally changed and my ability to automate certain data migrations. Like one of the tasks toward the tail end of my position within the content team was that Relias acquired a company called On-Course Learning, which owns the domain nurse.com. And this company was actually even, I think, a little bigger than Relias at the time. So it was a challenge to try to integrate these two companies. And we would have to migrate I think it was, I probably remember exactly, I think it was like 2,304 courses that we needed to migrate from their system to our system within like 4 months or something like that. So to kind of glean all of that information, get it into our database so it could sync into getting those courses into our LMS, not to mention to get all the course files like within the LMS too was a challenge. For that, I was managing 10 temps to help do some of the, for lack of a better word, grunt work. Like one of the issues that we had was that we had to get the exam questions and answers physically typed into the system, which was daunting. So that was one of the tasks that we had to have temps actually do. But a lot of those other items that would have taken ages and ages and ages to do, I ended up writing scripts to help automate, which was a challenge and was definitely what like kind of solidified some of my coding abilities. I've always found that I need to learn like hands-on. I could learn something abstractly or get the concepts first, and that could be important, but I won't actually solidify until I actually have to do something with it. So any questions about that? Okay. And then also like creating like visualizations, reports, and giving presentations to the leadership of the department at least once a month, just showing like what the bottlenecks and the projects were, what the risks were, what needed their attention to resolve. And again, I had like, because I had like the forecasting already done, it would just be like, what's kind of getting into the red zone compared to what my forecast was, and is there a reason for it? Or was it just a flaw in my algorithms? So with that opportunity, with the big acquisition that Relias made, I had the opportunity to switch to the engineering department, still as a data analyst, and work with the e-commerce team to migrate all 18 domains that we had acquired from On-Course Learning into a brand new technology stack. So they were using Magento and Adobe as a front and back end for that, and which was not something that Relias had used before. So my job there was to, because I knew content and there's data structures like the back of my hand, my task with them was to figure out a way to get all of that content into this new system. So I learned how to do API calls. I learned ETL pipelines, which not sure what you guys have been working on, but ETL is extract, transform, load. So you're taking data from one place, you're changing it to whatever structures or additional like fields or whatever consolidation you need, and then you load it into a new system. And ETL is something that I still do all the time. It's an important, if you're going to work with data, it's good to understand ETL pipelines. As well as doing like, again, some of the report automation and forecasting and trending that I had done. And then because it was a new team and Relias was always pretty scrappy, I got to actually work on some of the web development too. So once I did the backend work needed for the course updates, I actually made some of the pages, learning like JavaScript, CSS, HTML to, there's still a few pages on that site that I had created, which I'm always kind of proud to check out every now and then and see. So I learned those languages using things like Code Academy or learning from some of my teammates who have been in the tech field a lot longer than I had. Any questions about that? Okay, cool. Professional development wise, I've always been pretty ambitious too. So I had completed Relias's Emerging Leaders Program, which was like the HPLP, or high potential leadership program there. So I could develop more like the soft skills and learn to do things like pull together a business plan. At the end of that program, we had to pitch a new direction for the business, or a new avenue for the business to our like CEO and C-suite team. So that was a good experience to go through, if daunting. And I did more work with Udacity, where I did the data analyst nano degree as well as a deep learning nano degree, because while working with Python, I got really interested in deep learning, which is a form of artificial intelligence. I think a few slides back, I might have skipped over. Yeah, so the way that data science at its and artificial intelligence at its fundamental form works is it's all kind of linear algebra that you add some of the more complicated formulas and activation functions and calculus type stuff to get like a crazy curve that would actually portray reality. So the idea is that you would have your input layer, which would be your base data. Lately, the information I've been working with is text. So in those instances, what the input layer would be text data that had been pre-processed to be numerical, because computers don't know words, they know numbers. So, you could do it with one-to-one, like the word the could be number 1 because it's the most frequently used, the word and could be number 2, and so on through your lexicon. Or it could be something more complicated like a vector or a tensor, where you kind of have the words represented in 3-dimensional space and kind of cluster around maybe some semantic similarity. So you have those numbers as your input layer, and then you have what's called a hidden layer. These are called the neural networks because it's supposed to be similar to how the brain works with neurons, where you have each of these would be like, if you think about those arrows instead as like a linear equation. So this could be 2x plus 4, for instance, and that's as complicated as it gets. And whatever x is, you get the output for what this perceptron would be, and there would be an activation function, which means, like, let's say if this value is greater than 1, it will fire, and if it's less than 1, it will not fire. Or it could be a curve, whatever that activation function is. But you have sometimes hundreds of these, so you get mathematically you get like pretty complicated curves or various outputs, and this output layer would be a prediction for whatever it is. So right now the task I'm working on is sentiment analysis. So what I've been working on the past couple months has been taking in customer emails and trying to determine whether or not the person is angry. So my input layer would be the various ways that I'm pre-processing the text. The hidden layer is what is actually trained and where the artificial learning comes into place. And then the output layer is that prediction of, yes, this person has negative sentiment. No, this person does not have negative sentiment, or they are happy. And the way that a neural network learns is you ideally have labeled data. This is when it would be called supervised learning. And if I'm going too fast again, please feel to jump in. So I would maybe have an email that I know is angry and is labeled as angry. Feed forward is when, you know, I change that text to the numerical outputs. I have all of these linear equations, and then I get the output. If the output is good, then in back propagation, you would not change much. If the output is bad, you would, based off a learning rate that you preset, you change these linear equations. And you do that over and over and over again until you get right more of the time. Any questions about that? Okay, so yeah, that's the foundation of deep learning in like a super sped up and simple way, which I always like this comment of like, this is what machine learning is you have this pile of garbage that like, it's not like I know what these weights are. I know what the structure of my network is because I have decided on that, but all of the weights and everything is determined by that back and forth system. The things you change are called hyperparameters, and that would be things like the number of hidden layers, the number of perceptrons in the hidden layers, the learning rate, you know, very like what activation functions you're using, what error gradient function you're using for the back propagation. So that's where you get into the kind of like scarier math. But the kind of cool thing about data science is that I don't really need to understand what the error gradient function is. I just need to know that it works in tasks like this. So there's a lot of like academia and a lot of it's like, a lot of people have found this to work, so try it. And if that doesn't work, try this. And if that doesn't work, like it becomes more of an art than a science. There's only so much math, like you need to know some math, but I think in data science, people kind of overestimate the amount of math that you need to do. And this is kind of a similar pipeline for getting to the data science like tasks. And I have found that the reality of like data science work is that 90% of what I do are these three, where especially the data engineering, and that's those ETL pipelines and transformation and setting up the database and such. This is what a lot of the leadership team finds most useful. And then this is kind of a, you know, dream state when we have like the cool shiny stuff that we could work on. But it takes a lot of work to get to having data set in a way that you could actually work on these algorithms. Yeah, question?
Well, it's not a question. I want to say it amazed me, your experience. How did you jump from working with the special needs people and just jump into machine learning?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And I just want to ask you one question.
Mhm.
How did you go, well, at this point in your career, did you find a way to connect machine learning system that work with autistic persons? Or to use something that connect the puzzle, like you were working at the beginning in one field and now you're applying everything in that field too?
Yeah, so toward the end of my work with engineering here, like doing the web development stuff was kind of cool, but it definitely was not what I found interesting. Like JavaScript and I don't get along super well. I love Python. Python is what I work with 95% of the time, occasionally a little bit of R, but Python and I are great. So while I was working with the engineering team, and part of it too was there was going to be a lot of cool data analysis tasks and opportunities once we did that migration, but that migration was going to take 2 years. So even though I really loved Relias and I loved working with the company that was like, you know, ultimately working in that with those populations that I was passionate about, I realized that like opportunity wise, like if I wanted to work on machine learning and if I wanted to get better at this kind of work, I would need to leave the company just because it wasn't at like, that team wasn't mature enough to need data treated in the way that I wanted to treat it. So it was a bit of an impatience thing, but ultimately a good call. So in the background, while I was, working with this team, I was doing the deep learning nano degree with Udacity, which is where I learned those fundamentals of deep learning and I went through the simple neural network, but there's other kinds of neural networks too. So I learned enough that I could actually do some things. And I had a friend who she was very good with business intelligence. She works with Arista. Arista is a competitor of Cisco, essentially. They do network, they make the internet work. I don't know anything about how they make the internet work. But yeah, any kind of data center stuff, cloud stuff, they do all sorts of technical stuff I do not understand at all. But my friends understood the technical stuff, and she was starting a business intelligence kind of team within the Technical Assistance Center, the TAC team. These were also the people that you would call if your network went down or if you had problems with your network. Like you call them and they will figure out what's wrong and get you back online. So she was working on BI stuff. She didn't really like the math though. She knew I liked the math. So she encouraged me to apply. Unfortunately, I applied, like all the interviews went well that I had, and I was supposed to get hired with them a week before everything shut down due to COVID. So then I had to wait an additional 6 months because there was a hiring freeze. But yeah, one of the benefits, like right now, the team I'm working on is 3 people. It's the friends that I had going in who encouraged me to apply, which it's always nice to work with friends and people that you have rapport with, as long as like you can have a solid professional relationship to, which she and I do. And we got an intern that we ended up hiring full-time just last month. So now we're this little 3-person team, and we're developing, again, it's kind of going back to the beginning of my career. All of these TAC engineers are using Salesforce and putting all their data into Salesforce. So we're taking that Salesforce data, doing pre-processing and data changes to get some of the business intelligence insights that she knows would be interesting, because she knows enough about how everything works that she's like, we need reports on these kind of bugs versus these kind of bugs. I do not have that BI knowledge to be useful for that. So that's where that teamwork is really, really important. Like she's kind of our subject matter expert within the team, which, I would not be able to output anything useful without that kind of support. Because I would just be floundering around looking at things I don't understand. So we take the Salesforce data, we do another ETL pipeline. We first started off by building a database using MongoDB, which is essentially kind of complicated, or it's essentially JSON is the way that it's structured. Our data set got too big and we were running into performance issues on our server. So now we're doing a migration to PostgreSQL, which is relational and open source. So right now I'm not doing any machine learning work. I'm entirely focused on doing that data migration. So again, like 80% of the time you're not working on the fun stuff that like the reason that you're there, but it's all to kind of enable yourself to make those algorithms. And again, yeah, I always loved the language. So I love that I'm doing natural language processing now, doing escalation predictions and some of those visualizations like I used to. And one of the things that I have considered that would be really cool is that now, because I kind of geek out and nerd out a lot, I'll still like check in on like genetic research, and a lot of data scientists are working with genetics right now, because when you have big data, such as like a human genome or any kind of genome, you need people who know how to work with data to work with that. So potentially I could go full circle, and once I, really harden my skill sets, I could go back into academia or research, which I think would be really fun. But this is absolutely like, I didn't necessarily foresee myself working like so technically, such as at a place like Arista. Without having that like kind of dynamic within my team, I would have really struggled in this role. But I'm definitely learning a lot, and yeah, it's all about like kind of trusting what you like. I have found like I could have just continued like doing the project management and working with my Scrum team and doing all of that, but I really wanted to like make their lives easier. So I really wanted to automate some of their tasks, which the way that I ended up doing that became all these technical solutions. So I would just I would suggest like just leaning into what you're interested in and what you find you're good at, and just like keeping open to that like learning. And like there were a lot of times where I got lucky. Like I had that manager who was willing to give me the position so I could devote my time to this. But yeah, it's definitely been an atypical route, but I think a lot of people have routes that are not what you would expect.
I have a question for you related to that, Beldner. So you've talked about this really diverse history of different types of work, and kind of using the exploration mindset to just see what you liked, and that's led you in a lot of different directions. I'm wondering if you could point to any specific skills you learned in past jobs, whether it's like a technology or just sort of a mindset or a way of approaching work in general, that have helped you as you progress through your career.
One of the things that I am grateful for is having worked with people with autism, especially like those four, like I think about those four men that I used to work with. Like I only worked with them for a year, but they definitely had like a lasting impact on me, because you saw these people, and there was no avenue that you were like socially familiar with to connect with them. So it really kind of forced me to have to think outside the box and find ways to build trust with them and interact with them. And just, regardless of like what was at hand, whether it was like he needs to get familiar and comfortable with using a toothbrush. He's, I don't know, 30 years old and still has not gotten this skill. You have to find a way when nobody else has been able to before to get through like that. I think that kind of tenacity that I kind of picked up from working in these fields really served me well with, every time I see like a new technological blocker, that because I don't have the like computer science background, there's a lot of knowledge gaps that I have, which can be frustrating, where it's like, I'm not familiar working on like Linux consoles. Do I need to learn everything about Linux? No. Do I just need to figure out what to do? Like I have to figure out what I need to do and then figure out how I need to do that. And it could, and then walk away and move on to the next thing.
Yeah, that's really cool. It sounds like challenging yourself and not getting caught up with like imposter syndrome, I guess, is something that we talk about.
Sure. There's so much I don't know.
Do you have any strategies for combating that for people who are like, oh, maybe that's not my realm, or I'm just not meant to learn that thing?
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the benefits to a program like the one that you guys have, because that's not something I've ever experienced. It's good to surround yourself with other people who like are working like this and who are familiar with maybe that imposter syndrome, or going through some of the same, like you feel like you're like banging your head against the wall trying to get this data structure right. Like that kind of frustration is not experienced in all career paths. So it is good to have a network of people who do. Like for sure, one of the reasons why I'm in this field today is because I met my current partner, who was a network architect, and she encouraged me to like, I met her when I was a project manager, and even on our first date, she was like, why are you doing project management? So like, getting people around you to encourage you and like remind you that it's okay to not know everything about Linux to complete the task at hand. That's really, because there's 100 different ways to complete any of the problems. You just need to find one of the ways. And the first way won't be the most efficient. And you might, like when we first built our database with Mongo, you know, we spent months building that and now we have to change it, which has already taken 2 months. You just keep moving forward.
Cool,
It
thank you.
looks like Asia has a question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rachel. It's very inspiring. I have a question. Beside people who encourage you, did you have a real person? I mean, while you on your studying journey, did you have a person who you could ask the technical questions? And I assume you were self-taught, mostly self-taught.
I wish I had a person like that. Instead, I had Stack Overflow.
Okay. And who determines what technology to use in your small 3-person business right now? Why did you choose?
We decide for sure. And that's also where I'm grateful that the friends that I had who encouraged me to join her team, like she was definitely spot on that we would work well together, because she has the technical, like she is a computer science person. She is a network engineer. Like she was a good person to partner with, because she's very good at making the decisions like that. And if I have familiarity with the systems, I could tell her kind of what the requirements are. Like she doesn't know anything about machine learning. She doesn't necessarily know like what kind of data structure we need the text to be in the database. So I could tell her that, and then she can find out like what system will enable that. And that's kind of the dynamic that we have, which I'm grateful for.
Thank you. And another question, just maybe out of curiosity, I think your background in psychology helped you during the I mean, you could motivate yourself and you know how to learn and how to organize yourself and how the brains work and how to study best. I don't know.
Yeah, psychology
Did
definitely
it help?
Project management also helped with that, because it was good for me to have the experience of for a few years structuring everybody else's work, because I'm now able to do that for myself. And I'm kind of infamously like optimistic. I know that I need to like add at least 3 days to any projection that I will have on my own work. Like when I'm trying to self deadline myself, I know I need to give myself more than a window than I usually do. But yeah, creating that kind of structure and working from home for me personally works really, really well. My role with Arista is remote regardless of the pandemic. But I really like that, you know, if I'm stuck on something, I don't need to feel like I need to sit at my desk looking like I'm productive. Like I don't have that pressure. I could get up and play with one of my dogs or take a walk or, you know, step away. And for me personally, realizing that being a data scientist does not mean that I can work for 8 hours straight on data science tasks. That's just not, my brain can't do that. I don't know if maybe some people's brain can do that, but I have like a few good hours in the day for coding, and the rest of the time I need to be thinking through the problem and kind of organizing myself. And then it's way more productive to not try to like be typing away for 8 hours, and working from home and feeling like I'm not being watched like I would be in an office space was also helpful for me for like developing kind of the best work practices personally. I know not everybody is like that, but
a lot of our interns, I think this is our first time working on projects together after kind of working solo. And it sounds like you've done a lot of solo stuff and also a lot of team stuff. Do you have advice for people kind of translating their work to others, or things that they need, like communication or things that they should have in mind when they're working on a team together?
yeah, so when I was at Relias in the engineering department, I would sometimes be frustrated by how much collaboration would go into like a task before everybody like set out to do it. Like we probably spent at least 4 or 5 hours a week just like discussing the requirements of the different features that we were adding in. And at the time, because I was not like at the same depth as all of them in their tasks, and mine was kind of like to the side anyway, I found those meetings frustrating. But now, see, like being a more full collaborator on this team, I see how useful that is. I think pseudocode is your friend. My team has found like documentation and like making like requirements trackers and stuff like that is never quite fun, but it really saves a whole lot of time when you don't implement something in the way that your teammate was expecting you to implement it. And that's where I personally like pseudocode, because you could just know like, okay, we need these functions and we will need to share these functions across these different modules. Like if you're actually building a whole software package, so you really need to decide on that module structure within your package and know which functions could be shared and what different kind of data inputs and data outputs everybody needs to expect. So I don't think it's like personally, and I'm kind of a super introvert. I'm always happiest when I'm working alone, but I super value that time where we're like really digging in and making sure that everybody's on the same page, which I feel like I should have learned better by being a project manager and seeing how important the planning stages are. But the planning stages really are the most important. That's what you could like live or die by that.
I have another selfish question. Unless other people have things that they wanted to ask, I don't want to dominate everything. Since you have experience as a project manager, I'm curious if there are specific tools that have helped with like getting people on the same page, like you talked about. It sounds like pseudocode is one of them, but what are some of the other documentation type things that are helpful on a team? Selfish question, because that is something I'm working on one of our projects.
Yeah, I think you and I have pretty similar work backgrounds, so that makes sense. I still Scrum Master for my own team. We don't have, Arista is kind of a unique company in that they kind of only hire engineers. They don't have whole lot of like support staff to like enable the engineers to work. Like they pretty much everybody is technical who works at Arista. So we don't have a project manager. So I have taken what I know about like, agile methodology and such and introduced it to our team, such as like building out a Scrum board. I lead the Scrums, I take the Scrum notes, like I do all of those things that I used to do as a project manager to help like just keep us accountable and keep us checking in. When it was just, just me and my friends who were, because, our intern came in after both of us. We didn't really need that, but even just adding a third person, especially because our intern is fresh from college and still learning, and he's super smart and great and has surpassed our expectations, but we wouldn't know necessarily what he doesn't know. So that's when some of those like over communication practices really started helping us out. And there's no shame in not knowing things. I think that's always hard too when working with technical people, because everyone seems so smart and accomplished. And again, kind of going in with that imposter syndrome too. Like you don't necessarily want to own up to being like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But it's important to say that you have no idea what they're talking about. I think everyone's been there where they don't. So I think like being comfortable with that vulnerability is a hard skill to learn, but it's also good in this field.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Also, I wanted to say, like, my name's Rachel Beldner. All of you could, like, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or whatnot. I'm not very active, but I'm happy to be a resource.
Can I ask a question? What's on your study list to study further? Next subject or next technology?
Yeah, so, and I brought these appendix slides just in case I totally ran out of time, but I think I didn't necessarily want to be like, let's learn about CNNs and RNNs. So there's different kind of deep learning architectures besides that simple neural network that I first explained. This is called a convolutional neural network, and it's done for a lot of imaging tasks. Like one of the projects that I worked in one of my Udacity course, which I'm a huge dog person. I have 3 dogs. I love dogs. And the project was that you would build a dog breed classifier. So, you would have an image of a dog and your output would be a guess as to what breed that dog was. So you would train an algorithm to do that, and then you would train another algorithm to find human faces in a picture. And then you would combine them so that you could have like a dog breed classifier based off like your human face. Which I really, again, it's dogs, so I loved working on that and found out that I most resemble a Dachshund. But that's kind of the way that a network like this would work, is you have feature extraction or feature learning, where you're getting pieces of the you're taking this like flat image, and you, instead of making it flat, you kind of make it narrow and long, so that you could figure out like what's going on numerically, because the computer can see it better that way. And then you kind of, once you do all of that feature learning, you have another one of these neural networks for the classification task or like the prediction task. So I like my next learning, because I'm working with text right now, I'm finding a lot of different natural language processing algorithms. This is the basics of like a recurrent neural network, or a long short-term memory network. And what that does is it takes the previous output and applies it to the current one, or like the previous 5 outputs. And this is the way that a computer could accommodate for like, if I say a word, you could, pinpoint each and every part of that lexicon or the word, but the order matters too. So that's the way that a computer would maybe understand what negation is, because it needs to know that not was before the word before. So there's all different ways of like feeding this into a computer. And like, I know enough to have applied some of the models. I haven't found a model that has a lot of success yet. So that's what I'm really learning now is natural language processing and more of these more complicated architectures for deep learning. Also, data science is fun. If any of you are interested, I swear it's not as mathy as you need to understand some of the math, but don't let that scare you. Any other questions?
Can I ask you one more question?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that you have a passion to know why make people the way they are. So I can see that you were working with autistic people. So why did you get into that field? Like, what is this is personal. Why did you get into that field?
Like why with people with autism in particular? I think it was because of how interested I am about language development in the brain. And like to me, like I don't even necessarily see autism as a disorder. Like the people that in the group whom I was working with had a lot of impairments and, you know, had difficulty with a lot of different things. But I like autism, like to me, like the neuroatypical brain is not necessarily lesser. And I just really loved trying to think about how they were seeing the world and like what they could see that I could not see. And again, like with language development in particular, there's a lot of people with autism frequently have difficulties with language development. And again, not to like super nerd out, but I've always really been fascinated by the idea of like how much language constrains the way that we think. Like there's an example of Noam Chomsky, who is currently like kind of a political guy, but started off as a linguist guy. Had this example of there was a gas station where there were empty gas canisters, and there was later an explosion because it was not kept far enough away from flame. And is that because the way that we think of the word empty means that there was no dangerous gas? Because the gas canisters weren't empty, they had dangerous gas. So would that, if we had a different word from empty, would that kind of situation still have occurred because of the way that we are thinking about empty as a concept? Or, you know, different cultures think about numbers differently, different cultures and languages think about like ordinal directions differently, and like where we are relationally in space. And I've just found thinking about that fascinating. So not to nerd out too much, but that's definitely part of what drew me to the population, was just kind of opening my own mind a bit more to other experiences and other perceptions.
Thank you for sharing. I asked you because I'm a caregiver, and also I work with people that has Parkinson, dementia, and sometimes autistic too. So that's what I asked you this question.
Yeah. It's good
Thank
work.
you.
Like I still think about some of the people that I've worked with. Yeah, they've been really, really great people. It is a privilege to work with some of those populations.
Yeah, sometimes they amaze me with the things that they tell you things that that make you think a lot about how deep is life. Like people with dementia or Parkinson say deeper things and make you open your eyes. So that's what I asked you this question, and it's personal. It was personal. Thank you.
Of course.
All right, Rachel, I think we are at time now. We want to respect your time and everyone else's as well. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. I don't know if you have any last words or anyone has any last questions for Rachel.
I just want to encourage y'all to keep doing what you're doing. Like, I think this organization sounds great, and tech can be a lot of fun. And like I said, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if I could be a resource to anyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.